Steve, and just to clarify, the purpose of the recording is to provide a public record?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the second one of these with an informational briefing from an external, group. So I want to turn it over to IBW and the Carpenters. You can start us off and then talk a little bit about, your perspective and experience with data centers, and then we'll open it up for questions for the first half, and then we'll do the same thing basically with the Tech Council for the second half. So I don't know, Rico or John, or I'm not sure who wants to take it, but I'll turn it over to you guys.
Rico, you can start, buddy.
Thanks, John. Thank you, everybody, for letting us come here. My name is Rico Albuquerques. I'm with IBEW Local 24. We're the electrical workers. We represent 3,000, a little more than 3,000 members, and our jurisdiction runs from Frederick all the way to Ocean City. So we don't have the 3 western counties. We don't have the 5 southern counties of Maryland, and we don't have Cecil County. The whole rest of the state is ours. We represent what we call inside electricians, and that is not inside of a building, although some days you get lucky and you enjoy when you're inside of a building. Essentially, that means inside the fence line of a construction site. And so the outside electricians, folks that work on utility poles, they are outside the fence line of the construction site. So for us, the data center industry is very important, and we have grown. My local union, we were at 2,000 members back in 2021, 2022. So we've grown about 50%, 1,000 new members over the last couple of years, and a large portion of that growth is attributed to the data center industry in Frederick. So right now, that's the only large data center construction that I'm aware of happening in Maryland. There's a one or two here or there, and I know there's plenty of permits and a lot of talk about more. But in Frederick right now, we have 700 electricians working, probably closer to 800 if I'm being honest. There's also a prefab shop, which was built out there only to service that industry. We have about 150 electricians working there at that prefab shop. And for anyone who doesn't know, some of the electrical components can be fabricated, conduit can be bent, panels can be made off-site in a little more of a controlled environment. And so you'll make them off-site and then you'll ship them to the construction site. So all told, we have roughly 1,000 members that are working in that data center industry. And that's allowed us to do a couple of things that we think are a benefit to the community. So our apprenticeship class size has doubled. We were taking in anywhere from 100 to 120 apprentices a year. And our most recent class was 230 apprentices. And that was September of last year. September of this year, we're going to grow again. We're going to be well over 250. We'll probably be 275, possibly pushing 300 apprentices. And I just wanted to point out that goes to the conversation of data center jobs being temporary. So in my opinion, that hurts me to my core, because I'm an electrician, I'm a construction worker. Essentially, all of my jobs are temporary. Any job that I've ever worked on has been a temporary job, and we build one temporary job and then another temporary job, and we continue to work on those temporary jobs, and we make a 30, 40-year career of those temporary jobs. But bringing people into apprenticeship is creating more of a workforce, right? And so you're giving someone the foundational skills and the knowledge that they need to complete that 30 or 40-year career. You give them the understanding to get a master's license. Maybe they want to open their own contracting business. All of our apprentice graduates get a journeyman license. And so what we're able to do specific in Frederick County, because that's the large construction market for data centers right now, we're able to go inside of these high schools and say, who wants to work in this industry? Who wants to be an electrician? And then we have, juniors, their summer between their junior and senior year, we have them working out on that construction site, earning a living, seeing if they actually like it. Because, a lot of people want to work in the industry, and then, you have to use a porta pot, or you got to be on a roof when it's 100 degrees outside and maybe they change their minds. But it allows us to grow our apprenticeship, and then at the bargaining table it allows us to ask for more wages and better working conditions and better benefits because we have more members. And so all of that creates a better life for the electricians that we have as our members. But also, if you gentlemen and ladies are familiar with how prevailing wage is decided, then as wages go up in the area, that raises the floor for all electricians. So I like to say we don't only look out for our members; we improve the lives and working conditions of electricians in our geographical jurisdiction. Because for prevailing wage, for industry standards, for safety standards, all of those things, as our benefits and wages and working conditions go up, so do the benefits, wages, and working conditions of non-union electricians as well. Um, and so while folks say the jobs are temporary, we move from project to project. And a little bit about our apprenticeship. The way it would work is someone enrolls, they're going to get paid to go to school for free. So they're going to go to school. There's no cost to attend our apprenticeship, and then they're going to work full time while they're going to school. We have a 4-year apprenticeship, and when they graduate, they're going to get a Maryland State journeyman license. And like I said before, be on their way to a pretty rewarding 30-40 year career. Um, the last thing that I will say is, as I'm sure some folks on this call care about, data centers do provide a nice boost to the tax revenue, and they don't need a lot of services. And while people will say as soon as the construction is over, the jobs go away, that's not true. There's anywhere between 30 to 50 full time employees that will work at that data center. And then you have all the associated folks that are subcontracted with it. So, for example, after the data center and campus is fully built out, we anticipate having now it's a 2,500 acre campus. It's not one or two data centers, but we anticipate having 100 150 electricians going around that site daily, doing upgrades, doing service work, doing troubleshooting, things like that, because the industry will subcontract those things out. So there's a lot of jobs that are not tied directly to, let's say it's an Amazon data center. Doesn't mean they're going to be Amazon employees, but there will be a lot of jobs to service that data center outside of construction once it's built. So you have a lot of jobs, not a lot of needs from the county to service that data center, and a lot of tax revenue. That's our view of the industry, and that's why we think of it as in a positive nature. And then the last thing that I will say, just like any industry, there are drawbacks. So one thing that I've talked to folks in the Frederick community about is, if something is zoned industrial, um, what does the community want to be there, right? Because assuming something can be built there, it's not a manufacturing place. You're not going to have it's not a tire shop. It's not a paint facility. It's not something that's going to have a tremendous amount of impact on the community in that way. And I live in Harford County. I know you guys probably don't care as much about my opinion. I'm not a Baltimore County resident, but in Harford County, one thing that we have is a lot of warehouses, and they're putting them right next to main roads, and they're hundreds of yards long and wide. And from the outside, they look just like a data center. They might as well be a data center from the outside, but there was not a lot of good jobs created to build these things. There's not a lot of good jobs inside of them because they're just logistics centers. And there's a tremendous amount of traffic, 18-wheeler traffic, back and forth constantly. And so the communities that these warehouses are in, they are not happy about those things either. And if you're going to grow your tax base and you're going to do development, once the data center is built, they just sit there and hum quietly and make the county money. And so I do think it is a decent use of industrial zoning, as long as there is power available for them. Then we think that it's a pretty good opportunity for folks to get into our industry and to earn a lifelong career.
Great. Thanks, Rico. I don't know, John or Jason, do you guys have more to add before we go to questions?
Well said, Rico. John Barber, Partners Union. We support data centers 100%. It employs a lot of people, as Rico said. We don't have quite as many people working in the data industry as the electricians. We got a few hundred. The project up there in Frederick, we just started out there with a contractor. Right now, we got like 50 guys out there. It's looking to ramp up to about 100. But as Rico mentioned, there's it's great opportunities for the community. We hire within the communities. The apprenticeship schools, grow. It's just a plus for the community. The revenue base that Rico was talking about. I think down in Loudoun County, 30% of their taxes come from data center industry. So we support data centers 100%.
And I'll echo to John's point as well. This is Mike Dempsey with the Carpenters as well. We like to think of it as a pro-growth agenda when it comes to the role that data centers play in the community, but also the role that we play in the community. We're ready to train and skill up the community that is desperately looking for these kinds of jobs and an opportunity to work in the construction industry. But I would just say that growth can't come at the expense of creating those opportunities and real opportunities that people want to work and be able to participate in a lifelong construction career that John and Rico have mentioned. But our biggest ask, I would say, for one of the asks on this call or just topics of discussion is oftentimes we're not even really connected a lot of times with the developers or the end users for these projects. Oftentimes the community pushback with these projects comes from that lack of communication with the building trades in the community. So we would ask that we would just be connected with them to be able to work together on this, creating this pipeline so that way local workers are actually put on these jobs and that prevailing wage and good labor standards exist on these jobs as well.
Great. Thanks, Mike.
This is Jason with the Mid-Atlantic Pipe Trade. So I represent the plumbers and steam fitters up in Baltimore. I'll second everything Rico said. I think he put it very well. I mean, like IBW, we've got about 200 members working on each of the buildings that are going up right now out in Frederick County. And for the stuff that's down in Virginia, we've got a few thousand members working on data centers, either in construction or maintenance. So the jobs don't stop when the construction stops.
Great. Thank you. I guess with that, we can open it up to questions from the county side. Anybody has any questions?
Okay, from the guy who has electrical inspections, plumbing inspections, and building inspections under his department, I guess my question would be, first, what do you see as some of the problems associated with enforcement and or when these things go up? So you're going through inspections, and what are some of the conflicts, challenges, issues that you see that an inspector's coming out and he's seeing one thing, you're doing another thing, and there's no, NFPA or anything else guideline or instructions on that issue? Are there? I don't know. I'm asking. The question is, I should have had Ty in this meeting, but I don't. So I'm looking at what are some of the issues you might see while you're going through the construction of these things in the inspection process. And the second part of that question is, of all this training that's available, is that open up to the inspectors? Can they get some of this training? So I can tell you with the solar facilities, we have contradiction between what the electrical contractors are saying that what they can do when they put a rooftop solar facility on a building versus what we have in our code, our local code, Baltimore County code. So I'll open it up to whoever wants to answer those questions.
Yes, sir. So this is going to sound probably arrogant, but our view is it's just electric work. There's some special things, the SCADA rooms, things like that, but everything we do on any site that we work on is OSHA compliant, MOSH compliant, compliant with the NEC electrical code. So the only issue that I would say inspectors would have is, and again, I'm thinking of the site in Frederick. It's a large site. It's a very large construction site, very dirty, very muddy. Takes quite a bit of walking from the parking lot to get all the way to the job site, and then you're inspecting a pretty large construction site. But outside of that, nothing groundbreaking with that industry, and nothing that a ground wire is a ground wire and a neutral is a neutral, and 277 volts and 120 volts are still the same thing, and battery backup storage and diesel generator, all of these things are electrical components that your inspectors will inspect on much smaller construction sites across the county. So the scale of the site can create some challenges, but outside of that, it's just electrical work.
Well, we have Trade Point Atlantic, so we're familiar with very large sites. That's
That's an
3,100
excellent
acres.
point. That's an excellent point. It wouldn't be anything different than what you saw at Trade Point.
Okay, that's it was a question I wasn't sure, so.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Rico. Other questions?
Hi, just a quick question. This is Abby Vitaliano. I'm with the Department of Economic and Workforce Development. I think, Mike, you touched on this a little bit, but I think some of what we have heard from other, communities that have had data centers is there's this notion that a lot of the construction jobs will be coming in from out of town, folks that are more experts on building data centers. So we kind of have a similar concern that you mentioned about ensuring that the pipeline is the local workforce. So do you have any idea of where the gap exists that our local workforce isn't really being brought in? Is there a way that we can ensure that our teams are actually at the table? Where's that gap happening?
Yeah, I will also give I'll give just a little bit of background regarding how the intake process goes for a lot of trades. It depends on the trade, right? So some trades do intakes at a different time. I can only speak to the carpenters. So ours is a rolling admission process. What typically ends up being the hurdle can be found in pre-apprenticeship opportunities, which can be giving local members of the community an opportunity to try construction before they want to make the full jump. And that's something that the county can require on these projects. The pre-apprenticeship can be a part in the community benefits agreement or the project labor agreement. Pre-apprenticeship gives local residents an opportunity to try their hand at construction before they actually end up making the full jump for their career. That is one skills gap that we've seen. The other one that we've seen a lot of times is I mentioned this in my early statement, but there's just not much communication regarding the developer and end user with the building trades to actually develop that pipeline from the beginning. It's too late to make that phone call once construction's already started or the process has already begun. And I'll let the reps on this phone call kind of speak to this as well. But that initial conversation has to take place with the developer and the building trades before all of this gets started, because we can go out there and we can recruit people and we can find the folks that need to be working on these projects. That is legitimately our job. But if that conversation doesn't occur, that's on the developer and the end user at that point. And that is the county's responsibility, and they have the ability to require that on their part too. For anyone to say that you can't require that, you can't make that a component to approve these projects, that has to be a conversation that occurs. And we're happy to have that conversation with everybody, because nothing makes us happier than putting local people to work on the project so they don't have to drive 100 miles for a job. That's not a sustainable opportunity or something that you can even expect an 18-year-old to do, right out of high school, to have to drive to Prince George's County or to drive to Virginia for these projects. So I would say pre-apprenticeship, which the county can require, and then additionally the conversations with us to make sure that we can build this pipeline well in advance. And every one of the reps on this phone call can tell you about the recruiting that they do at the schools, at the vocational schools, at the groups that are dedicated to this solely. But I'll let Rico and John kind of chime in, and Jason, if there's any other thoughts on that too.
Yeah, Abby, I just wanted to touch on it briefly. I hear this quite a bit, that when union labor is involved, it incentivizes people to come from out of town, and it's nothing could be further from the truth. It's so frustrating to me when I hear that. When our contractors are involved on a project, they're using our members, and the word is in our name, right? Local union. I'm with Local 24. That means it's local people, local residents. Now, you heard earlier about the size of our jurisdiction, so I'm not going to promise you that every single person working in on a Baltimore County data center will live in Baltimore County. We'll certainly do everything we can to make sure that whatever county residents want to work there will be able to. But the idea that people are going to be coming in from all over the country is just not true, and especially with unions, it's much more likely that happens when you're using a non-union contract. And I understand that you wouldn't have anything to do with that anyway, but I can tell you that, does anyone come from Virginia? Yeah, sure, but the 1,000 people we have working in the industry right now, 990 of them are Maryland residents, right around from the region.
That's helpful. Thank you both.
I appreciate this conversation. Maybe just to branch off of it a little bit, I'm wondering if you could point to a particular project locally that did this successfully in your experience. It doesn't have to be necessarily that same scale, but for example, when we think about Johns Hopkins project down in the city and the local labor that required in the years that followed, there was a really healthy conversation about, what were the quality of the employment that was included in that development and how lasting was the impact locally. And I'm just curious from your perspective, if you could educate us on a project that did a great job.
There's a huge project that just finished up, the CSX tunnel. I'm sure you guys are aware of it with Skanska. Big, huge project. Didn't have any local requirement hires on that one, but there was a PLA on there, and we recruited heavily from the city, worked with the contractor, went to their outreaches, they came to ours, and there was a great participation of Baltimore City residents on there. It wasn't even needed. But so the opportunities are there. It's easy to get residents to work, especially when it's mandated from the county or the end user. We have a project that's getting ready to come up, the Amtrak tunnel, where Clark, they have a mandate to hire 50% of the apprentices from, I'm gonna say 21224. The zip code's wrong. I just made it up, but it's a specific zip code that is a requirement to hire from, for apprentices on that project. And there's a certain percentage of journey people that are supposed to be from the area also. So it's different requirements that the county can put to make these things happen. And it's pretty simple.
And I'll add to that as well. I'm more than happy to speak with anybody on this phone call about what that looks like in terms of specific, like actually getting into the nitty gritty with the actual zip codes and actually putting together, like, this is what this looks like. We're more than happy to talk to anybody on the phone call about that.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for the information.
I think we're getting close to 9:30. Probably time for another question if there's another one out there. All right. Well, hearing none, guys, really appreciate the time. I think we got some, good information to, include and then, follow up on once we're further down the road. But yeah, thanks for participating in this process and being on this morning. And I guess with that, we can go to the Tech Council a few minutes early this morning, if that's all right with everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right, Kelly, I'm gonna flip it over to you. Floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me. And since we are on the record, I will just say I am Kelly Schultz and I'm the CEO of the Maryland Tech Council. And under the direction of the Maryland Tech Council, one of our programs that we created within the past year is the Data Center Alliance, bringing together community, political activists, obviously workforce development with the unions that are represented here and industry partners, to be able to educate folks just like you on data centers and mainly the economic value for local jurisdictions, but also to demyth some of those common themes that are out there. And I know that my office shared a copy of a slide presentation. I didn't know if somebody wanted to share that or if it was okay for me to share it.
Yes, you can share.
Fine with me if you share it. Yeah. Are you able to do that, Kelly?
I'm going to give it my best shot.
There you go.
Yep. there
Did
you
it
go.
work?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, the tech council knows how to actually share a file, which
Use
sometimes is
technology,
not the
yeah.
case. So great, thank you very much. So I guess we'll just get started on why we're here, right? And why we're presenting to Baltimore County. I want to just acknowledge the county council and the county executive for having the interest in this and finding out the answers to the questions. So everybody's asking the right questions and focusing on really the facts of what's happening. And I know that that is in part what this group is doing here today, but also to pursue constructive solutions. And that's kind of why we're here, to be able to help in some things that are happening in other areas around the state and around the country. And so I'm excited to be able to share kind of what we have. Why are data centers in demand? Well, the world is seeing explosive growth in digital commerce, cyber, and scientific R&D. This gives you, just a little bit of, some of the data that is around the growth factors. There is a myth that data centers demand is only because of AI. That's not true. And you can see from the chart here that the demands for the workload from AI workload and non-AI workload. So both areas are seeing explosive growth. And it shows that by the year 2030, the non-AI data center demand is expected to nearly double. And in Maryland, a big driver of that is federal customers, cyber, defense, scientific R&D, NIH. Think of all of those government components that we're used to talking about here in the state. And in addition, the next 5 years, consumers and businesses will generate twice as much data as all the data created over the past 10 years. So collection of data from every industry is going to be seen as explosive growth. So a little bit, this is just a little primer, and we'll go into it a little deeper. This is the economic impact of an average size data center. And when we're talking about an average size data center, we're using for these examples, the large load hyperscale, which is what we're talking about, this potential project in Baltimore, approximately 800,000 square feet. So give or take whatever the size of the project is, that's what these numbers are based on our economic impact studies. And you can see the direct and indirect jobs during construction. I won't reiterate what the unions had said about the number of jobs that are expected throughout the process, both during construction and post-construction. So this is the state tax revenues. So this is just a little primer as to what you can expect from state revenues, not necessarily Baltimore County revenues, but with that average of $14 million in annual state tax revenues, you can see the equation as it averages out for the number of police officers to be hired, firefighter salaries, teacher salaries. So sometimes it's just kind of best to quantify the number of resources, community resources that you could have in your community, given that average size data center. So the current economic activities in Maryland, and throughout this presentation, it's going to be kind of focused on the project that's happening in Frederick County right now, only because that is the newest and I would say largest of the large load hyperscale sites that are happening in Maryland. So we're taking some of this information based on an example of that project that's happening. You can see what the unions had talked about with the number of electrical workers, the new workers hired in the prefab facilities. So they may be union or non-union, but that is all based on offsite work for that Quantum Frederick project. And the apprentices, and I guess I'll take a huge amount of pleasure in this, having been a former labor secretary, really understanding the need of the apprentices and the apprenticeship program, and that explosive growth with bringing in about double in 1 year the number of apprentices that they were able to bring in previously. That speaks loudly for this. Not only does that speak loudly, but the fact that they are able to now open apprenticeship classes outside of a jurisdiction that they normally would have in the past. So Frederick Community College has its first apprenticeship classes through IBEW. And I think that we should all take a lot of joy in those numbers. So the local tax revenue, and again, this is an example from the Quantum Project, and the HRNA advisors, they studied the full Quantum Project. Now, these numbers are larger than the proposed areas within Baltimore County, but this is 16 million square feet of the campus that is at the old East Elko station in Frederick. And the tax revenue for Frederick County alone, not state tax revenues, is expected to go $215 million annually. And that is an estimate at this point in time upon full operation. That's when all of the buildings are coming. So this will result in a mass increase in obviously those community services that we all at the county level understand are super important to the residents in which we serve, to include education, police, fire, and lots of other services. So this number would equate to, if we go down to the numbers and real life numbers, it would be equal to about 1,800 entry level teacher salaries every year. So every county, and I can't speak to Baltimore County, how your recordation taxes are divided up. So just in 1 year's time from the purchase of the property and the recordation taxes that have been collected, it was about $51 million, let's just say, in the recordation taxes. I just want to spend just a second on this slide because you'll notice that ag preservation for 2025 was at $12.6 million. Frederick County is very proud of its ag preservation, very proud of being an agricultural based community. But last fiscal year, the counties were not given any ag preservation funds through the state because obviously there was some issues. Well, there was the budget deficit and they had to cut some of the programs. So ag preservation was one of the programs that they had cut. Because of the data center purchases of those properties, Frederick County was able to contribute almost $13 million into ag preservation in the county, the only county that was able to do that at that magnitude. I also want to point out the general fund allotment here. And again, this all depends on how your recordation taxes are committed within Baltimore County statute. But within that $24 million, Frederick County was able to fully fund its free transportation for community transportation, the buses through the county, which they would not have been able to have done otherwise. And that was an important area that the county executive and the county council really wanted to be able to continue forward with. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the myths that are out there, and water is obviously one of those great myths. And we can talk a little bit about this at length if you choose, but much of what you hear about the data centers and the water use is inaccurate at best and misleading at worst. Data centers typically house thousands of servers and they need to be cooled. That's a fact. Those servers can be cooled in one of three ways: air cooling, water cooling, or cooling with other liquids. New innovations that are happening every single day mean that data centers increasingly need no local water to cool their servers. Closed loop cooling systems mean data centers can use reclaimed wastewater on a continuous loop. And air cooling means that data centers need no water at all for cooling purposes. And, you know, just a little bit of a fun fact, we're going into spring and all of us golfers out there, golf courses use 97% more water than data centers. So home prices has also been a topic of conversations when I go to public meetings in all jurisdictions around the state. I just wanted to point this out. Loudoun County, as we all know, is the largest place on the planet for data centers. There is no other place on the globe that has as many data centers as Loudoun County, Virginia, for many reasons, right? That's where all of the fiber, that's where the think tank was for the internet in the beginning. And this shows kind of how Loudoun County in Virginia has outperformed the rest of the housing market in Virginia between the years of 2010 and 2024. So Loudoun County is not having a problem with home price values. The rural landscapes, just very briefly, as I said before, Frederick County, very agriculturally front of mind. Same with Baltimore County, beautiful agricultural areas. But what Frederick County had done in their statute when they had their zoning text amendments was they limited the amount of data center land mass for the county to less than 1%. So by statute, the amount of data centers in their mapping of the county cannot equal more than 1% of the total land mass. And in addition to that, developers by statute must put 5 acres of farmland into preservation for every 1 acre that is rezoned for data center development. And they have a restriction on the siting, which is 500 feet or more from residential neighborhoods, which is, I would say, above average compared to other jurisdictions, not only in the state, but across the country. And then they have put into statute additional best practices to include noise buffers with tree plantings and other parts of their statute to address some of those local community concerns. So sound levels is another one of the myths that sometimes people talk about, that the sound level, the amount of decibels that are coming out of data centers. You'll just see a chart here. I don't think I need to read it for you, but a typical data center, the total decibels falls below or at the type of conversation that you and I are having right now, and just above rain. So it kind of gives a little bit of information there. But I will also say the construction of data centers has come much further when it comes to understanding the noise burdens. So they have done things like placing generators between large buildings and making sure that the trees and the buffers are at, wonderful high levels in order to be able to detract from that. I've heard that some people that have gone on site to a data center talk about the traffic, the noise coming from the road is much louder than standing next to a data center. If you've ever been to one, you'll realize that. So energy, big, huge topic of conversation. Our friends in Annapolis right now are working on, coming up with some ideas about, Maryland generation of our own energy and different capacities. And I don't think that's going to be 100% fixed this year, but we can hope that we at least get something. So one thing that people always say is that data centers right now are causing our energy rates to go up today. And first, I will say that since energy prices have been going up, there has been no data center that has come online to take any additional energy. So there is kind of an inconsistency, thinking that the data centers right now are causing our rise in energy prices. There's a lot of studies out there that show data centers and the amount of energy that they use. But one of the things that Annapolis did last year that many people forget about it, and it was a big deal, was the Next Generation Energy Act passed last April in 2025. And basically what it says is that data centers have to carry their weight. They have to pay for their increased energy. Most people don't understand that data centers and commercial businesses in general pay a higher rate for energy than residential users. And on top of that, commercial consumers of energy also pay a tax on their energy that goes into a special fund in Maryland's coffers. And now what this new law says is that now there's an additional cost for transmission and any updates that data centers are mandated to be able to pay for that. And I'll just note that this point at the bottom, today's data centers are far more energy efficient than decentralized data servers. And everybody that's as old as me will remember that when we went into office buildings way back in the day, everybody had their own server closet. It was that weird place that everybody knew that an IT guy was going to have that special. So all of those buildings that we see all over all had our own data centers inside of them. What data centers have done now, they have upgraded to decentralized data servers. So all of those data centers have come out of individual office buildings and individual users into one centralized location. And that is an efficient way to be able to control the energy. So there's a great study. It's also on our website, and happy to send it to everyone, but it's through Berkeley Lab. And it really talks about the states that have the highest load growth due to data centers. They saw an average electricity prices decline in inflation adjusted terms between 2019 and 2024. So those that are bringing in extra energy users like data centers, they have a reduction in their energy price. And those states with load reductions oftentimes saw prices go up. And why is this? Because more data centers means there are more large customers to pay for grid upgrades. That way, they're paying for all of that construction, everything that's needed as far as new transmission lines, new infrastructure, because we do have aging infrastructure all over the state and all over the country. And in Northern Virginia, residential customers pay 10% below. This is in Northern Virginia, highest data center area in the world. They pay 10% below the US average for transmission cost due to data centers paying for those costs. And prices are declining in other U.S. states. So there's a couple of studies that just came out. Pacific Gas and Electric cut electric rates by 11%, citing data center growth as a driver. Indiana, Michigan, and Power is reducing base electric rates, citing new revenue from data centers in its service area. And Dominion Power in Northern Virginia, residential electric customers are paying 10% below, as I said, the average transmission costs because of the data centers. And I just want to open it up to questions, but I'll just say, data centers can be right. There has been a couple of decades of data center growth in very small geographical areas of this country. Now it's expanding. We've learned a lot of lessons from those. The data center industry has decided to really work into the technology to be able to do things better, and they are. There is the ability to keep our counties with that rural character and the farmland that we love so much. And while we're doing that, being able to bring in additional income, being able to pay high-paying jobs for those that are involved in the unions and non-union work, and the critical infrastructure, right, that it brings into a local jurisdiction that I don't think we can ignore, especially given the amount of government and very national security type efforts that we in Maryland hold so strongly to us. And of course, we can't deny the amount of tax revenues that would come and supply those additional services to our residents across the state. So then I'll open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. A lot of really helpful information in there. I'll just echo the call for questions if anybody has any.
I had a couple about the water use. I guess for reclaimed wastewater, what's the infrastructure involved? What wastewater are they reclaiming, and how are they reclaiming that?
Yeah, so I'm not an engineer, and I'm not in construction, but I'll tell you how they're doing it in Frederick County. I don't know exactly how they're hooked up, but on the site that they are on at the old Zelco site, they do have access to the wastewater treatment plant. So they run the water in, and then it literally does a loop around the inside of the buildings and cools the servers. And then that remaining water goes back into the wastewater system. And then it's able to be utilized for whatever the county is utilizing it for, and then it creates a constant loop.
Okay. And then the golf course stat, is that national use of golf course water? Like, is that including desert golf courses, or is that specific to Maryland?
You know what, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that total as far as the irrigation and which jurisdictions it was, but I can find that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
So I'll just pile on. When you talk about air cooling, recycled, and just regular water, do you have the analysis of what it costs per whatever square foot and how they compare? Because Matt, I think one of the things, if you remember Sparrows Point Golf Course, they were going back and forth because whether they wanted to use recycled water or whether they wanted to use, water, from the city, because the costs were, after the infrastructure was built, somewhat, they were, it was close. So if there's these other methods, do we have it what it costs, per whatever, for the different types of ways to cool the system? Is that available? Is that information available?
The cost to the county or the cost to the user?
Cost to the user.
I don't have that, but I can check with the user.
And then same thing with, part of this is gonna, when you debunk the whatever, the mythology or whatever that, that everybody thinks, the mythology of what they think are the data centers are having caused. When you look at the different areas that you talked about with data centers that reduce their energy costs, do you have a comparative analysis of what it was costing them before the data centers were there and then after? I highly doubt it, but that's to make the argument. Again, you need the data behind it to show. You just can't sit there and say, yeah, you're going to get a 10% reduction on your energy, on your electricity rates, because this is what happened in Dominican, or happened in Northern Virginia. To show how that happened would be very valuable to our purposes of showing how, to making the argument that these things are not bad to our environment nor bad to the community, and as assistance to that. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
Pete, so that's a great question. And given the allotted amount of time, I did not go into the full studies of where they were. But for example, that Berkeley study, it does a very in-depth review of the costs. And there's other studies where I brought out the Pacific Gas and Electric. There was a study that was done for that. And so that's where they would have all of that, the more intricate details of that. And I'm happy to forward all of those studies to your office so that you can review them.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did the Berkshire thing have that in there? So yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah. At least a resource that we can go to find that information and make the arguments.
Absolutely. And I know your guys are not going to be like web searchers for all of this information. And I can get this information to you, but the link that's on the screen right now, that goes directly to our Data Center Alliance page on my website, which has all of the resources cited that we just talked about. I can make sure that I get all that to you individually, but if anybody wants a really fun afternoon to look at the in-depth myths and facts versus fiction, all of that is completely cited on the website.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
Hi, Kelly. Brady Locker from Environmental Department. Could you talk about what, if any, protections local jurisdictions have in place if a data center goes out of business or is abandoned and the company just walks away, as far as the investments that local community made in that data center? I'm thinking I mean, the easiest comparison would be a solar facility where we have decommissioning agreements because the solar is not intended to be a forever solution on that site. So they have to take it down after 25 years post securities, that type of thing. How are data centers like and not like that? And should there be, or are there any protections for the local investment in the data center where the company to walk away?
Yeah. So first I will say that at least in Frederick County, there hasn't really been a monetary local investment. So I guess if we're talking about different types of community investments, there hasn't been monetary. So none of the data centers have come in looking for tax credits, anything like that, from the local jurisdictions. But as far as the descaling, I know that as far as the leases are concerned, because the end users are typically leasing the facilities in which are being built by the developers. So AWS, for example, is leasing some facilities, and they have between a 15 and 20-year lease on that, depending on the arrangement that they've made. But as far as decommissioning them, I don't know if there's been anything specific in writing that the counties have done in order to be able to earn back from those developments with the buildings on site. Frederick County right now is going through a process of a community benefits agreement process. They did not do it before they did the zoning text amendment and the overlay. What they had done is they had said, once we get the overlay there, we're going to bring the community in to talk about what those community benefits are. And I know that is one of the topics of conversation, but I don't believe they have anything statutorily or in writing to demand that certain decommission process.
Okay. Yeah, it's actually precisely because of that leasing structure for the whole business, it seems susceptible to a bubble burst and there's no more market. Everyone breaches their lease and walks away. Not to say that that's going to happen, but just curious if that's thought of if there are solutions for that.
Yeah. So what I'm sure that there are solutions. You folks that work with the county are much smarter on that than I am, having, had developments that you've worked with before. But this is what I would say. I've been to public hearings where people have said that the need for data centers is not going to be there in the next 15, 20 years. So the naysayers seem to think that. The data that we see does not show that. And in fact, it's only going to be an increasing amount of data that's going to be needed and utilized. And now there is this conversation for redundancy purposes in order to be able to extract the amount of data that is in the large data centers, being able to have smaller data centers utilizing to be able to transfer data from one data center to the other for the amount of redundancy and usage that they would need in order to be able to share that. So we're not foreseeing a lack of need for data centers in the foreseeable future. I don't know if that helps you, but.
No, fair. I have no opinion on what, the future of data centers.
Sure.
I was just curious how to address that potential. And then just the other question I had, I just dropped in the chat, but was the ratio of tax revenue to square feet of a data center. I know you mentioned it was over $200 million expected for full build out, I think, in Frederick County. What is the relationship between, a square foot of a data center and a dollar of tax revenue?
I'm trying to, I have a slide on that, so I'm sorry. For the average data center, which we look at about 800,000 square feet, it would be about $18 million. I believe that's where we are.
Okay, thank you. I'll take my shoes off to do the math off camera.
I'm sharing my screen, so I could always, kind of pull up my calculator.
Thanks, Kelly, for the information and everybody for the questions. I'm curious if there are sort of local jurisdictions in Maryland that you would refer us to that you think are doing a good job of meeting the data center development where it is currently. I think that, for instance, in Frederick County, part of what they've admonished is that while there are technologies that can make energy and water usage, less intensive in the industry in general. It's a huge industry, and how that actually comes to be built locally isn't always cutting edge. And so having local regulations or state regulations that require certain tiers of generators or certain types of water reusage infrastructure, energy infrastructure, help get the best quality development for our communities. And I think the same on the taxation side. You referenced, that we're talking about generic development, but what our actual taxation regulations are here would be what ends up driving the results for our community. And we don't want to be lagging a few years behind the best practices for community benefits agreements or other local laws. And I guess I would just cite like a case study in Oregon where they passed House Bill 3456, the Power Act, where they had for several years a lag where their residents were paying about 20 cents per kilowatt hour, while their largest users were paying 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And I know that, for example, you could say that today the data center industry is paying for the infrastructure it needs in Oregon. That isn't because they came online and started paying for it. It's because the community put guidelines and laws in place that guided that development in a way that would pay for itself. And they had to learn that the hard way and retroactively, develop those policies. So could you help us look to places where they've met the industry where it is, proactively embrace development while having laws in place locally that gets the best out of results for everybody?
Yeah. So there's a lot. Let me try to unpack that, Greg. Okay. So as far as other jurisdictions that are doing it well, we had talked about Loudoun County. Loudoun County is now in other parts of Northern Virginia. They're looking to redefine some of their statutes. They're looking to go back and increase some of the setbacks. Those setbacks were not what they are, let's just say in Frederick County, what had passed there, or what had passed in Prince George's County. I'll say the process that I have seen that has worked really well was what Frederick County had done, right? Frederick County, I sat on their initial workforce or work group for data centers over 3 years ago. And so we went through a year-long process with that. The county council was really clear about studying and listening to a lot of different groups and community members and industry specialists because they wanted to learn from what had happened. And I think that they did a really good job with kind of defining where communities within Maryland could utilize the information in which they were able to come up with. So a lot of what we talked about, setbacks, about water usage, about noise barriers, all of that came from just several years of looking at not what best practices were, but what best practices can be. And Prince George's County, subsequently, they also passed a series of regulatory requirements for the industry that is not far from what Frederick County had done. So I think that serves as a baseline to look at some of those important issues that you might be dealing with in Baltimore County. So I think that's good. And as far as protections that are in it, and when it relates to technology, listen, I run the Maryland Tech Council, right? We are all about, there's going to be new innovations, new text messages. I was just looking at the message from Pete up above. New ways in which we can do things better. And with that, I think that it's hard pressed, and I've kind of advised other people to not put in the best and greatest technology of what you think that's going to be right now in a regulatory or a statutory type of requirement, because it's going to be forever changing. Battery storage is coming, but it's not here yet. So to require battery storage right now, you're not going to have the best innovative technology coming from that as far as backup. Obviously, using very high rated diesel generators is something for sustainability purposes that's going to be great. But from what I have seen from a very technical industry, they are thriving and investing in very up-to-date innovations and technology, because quite frankly, all of that will save them money in the future as well, outside of just being sustainable. So I fall short of recommending anything specific as far as the best and new, the greatest in technology in writing as to a mandate, but perhaps giving them some goals.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Greg, for the question. I know we are a little bit over time, so I want to thank Kelly for joining us today and all the info. I think we may have some follow-up questions for the Tech Council. Kelly, I think we could probably sort some of that out by email, so we'll follow up with
Yeah,
you.
so Tucker, if it's okay with you, I can send you the follow-up, and then you can distribute to the folks at the county that you think would benefit from that. And I am surrounded by subject matter experts in all of those that I may not have been able to answer, but I can get very technical responses on some of these, and I'll forward them to you, Tucker, and you can distribute.
Perfect.
Is that okay?
That sounds perfect. Yeah, thank you. Okay, sounds good. All right, well, thanks to the Tech Council for joining today. I think we have the next one of these 2 weeks, Steve.
Yes. Yes.
So we'll keep going. But yeah, appreciate everybody's time today, and stay tuned for the next one.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it.
Thank you.